Hello, everybody. So, our new moon this month is going to be occurring in the sign of Pisces, and that's happening on March 18th. And, you know, as always, these days, a lot is going on in the world that is disconcerting and disruptive and horrific, to be quite honest. So I like to do these, new moon, full moon readings as a kind of regular check-in to just see what's going on in the world and provide some kind of insight or guidance for all of us, really, for myself as well, to see how to navigate these energies, these occurrences in a skillful way. It can be helpful to get an overview, to understand some of the underlying energetics of a situation, just so you can, I don't know, be prepared in some way. Uh, have a kind of guideline. So I'm doing that today. And most of you probably know, or some of you may not, I'm a professional tarot reader and an associate marriage and family therapist. So I'm, have a master's degree in counseling psychology. And I, came into that field after doing tarot readings for people for over 10 years. So in many ways, I've married these two wisdom traditions because I see a lot of overlap. I'm not the first person to say that. But you can think of the archetypes within the tarot as sort of like marking points. These archetypes point to distinct packets of energy that give you a glimpse into our unconscious, things that are going on in the collective unconscious, similar, obviously, people who are skillful far more than I at astrology do this all the time. They're tracking these planetary transits and noticing correspondences, right? When certain planets are in aspect to one another, statistically, there are certain things going on in the planet. And again, these are correlations, not causations. But, when an image comes up and there are certain occurrences that happen in the life of a person that correspond to the imagery in the cards, when that happens frequently enough, as it has with me over the course of my career, I started reading professionally in 2011, you can say things like, in my experience, when these cards come up in a reading, these types of events are likely to come through. And of course, I always want to preface that with, there are many different ways that archetypes can speak and can present, but the energy all tends to be the same. Mars energy is cutting, things like car accidents, breakups, but also, taking charge, making strong decisions, hot, fiery, passionate expressions would come up around Mars energy. And similarly, for Venus, marriages, the growth of a business, the blooming of your garden, beauty, bonding. These are the kinds of archetypal energies that go along with Venus. So, and again, the tarot has all that as well. I like to think of the cards as being visual representations of distinct aspects of the human psyche. And, thoughts become things. So, imagery, things that we use to focus our attention on, have a way of making their way into our lives in concrete ways. So, I'm just going to look into the energetic of this time, and I'm going to ask for insider guidance around what would be most helpful for us to know at this time as we are coming up on this new moon. So I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to go silent. I'm going to concentrate while I shuffle. Okay, I'm just going to say a prayer over these cards. Mm. Whoa. So, the other thing that happens when I'm reading tarot, in addition to just sort of having studied the archetypal meanings, at least the most widely agreed upon, there's a kind of intuitive process to reading where certain things, but then you allow impressions to come through about how to apply the meanings. And I can find it very interesting, the cards that came up in this poll, because I feel like they're very much reflective, or they have been toned by what I just chose to share with you regarding Mars and Venus. The poll here is almost exclusively wands and cups. And we could easily correspond the energy of Mars to wand energy. Wands are the element of fire. They are passion, creativity, life force energy. They represent taking definitive action. They are a kind of externalization of one's will or motivation based on where they're inspired to act. And cups tend to be receptive. They tend to be more feminine in nature. They represent matters of the heart, feelings, emotions, intuitions, they tend to be relational, and they could very easily correspond to the energies of Venus. So it's so super interesting. Obviously, I'll hold up all the cards and you'll get a chance to see the spread at the beginning of this video. But I think what's interesting about this, and then sort of the bridge is the death card. This is the one card that is both major arcana that bridges the grouping of wands to cups. And so what I'm going to suggest is that this reading is pointing to this idea that we have been acting out of this masculine energy to the exclusion of our engaging in our more relational or empathetic natures, that we've been going it alone, and that we've been carrying this burden of sort of the individualistic, the acting on impulse, allowing our passions to govern our actions for far too long, and that a change is coming. That we must, in fact, and to some degree, there's a correspondence between the death card and the tower in the tarot. Both represent significant changes, major changes that affect us in core ways. It is widely accepted that tower represents changes that are happening in the external world, whereas the death card more often points to changes that are happening internally within ourselves, that we are having a radical shift in who we identify as, and therefore who we show up as out in the world. You can think of death as being a symbolic transformation, much like actual death. That's a major transition from, our embodied, life into, whatever you believe, right? The next chapter, the next phase, the next iteration of consciousness. And so I believe that in this pull, Spirit is saying, like, we need to come into a state of balance between this sort of solitary, fiery, more Mars-driven energy into a greater sense of, instead of it just me, we have to move into we have to come from a heart-centered place and connect with other people. It's interesting. The 10 of Wands is a card that I actually cite in my thesis, Tarot and Attachment, because I have come to correlate the 10 of Wands with dismissing attachment. And so let me give you a little bit of a primer on dismissing attachment. Dismissing attachment arises out of conditions in early childhood where a child is punished, criticized for emotional expressions. And so over time, if this occurs consistently enough, the child develops behaviors around suppressing awareness of emotions and certainly suppressing emotional expressions, because they learn pretty quickly that doing so will either get them punished or rejected. And, to an infant, that means death. And so it is so emotionally terrifying to be confronted with being ejected from, the family system, that you develop these behaviors unconsciously in order to elicit closeness, right? So if your caregivers are overly negatively responding to your emotional expressions, then you just stop expressing. which doesn't mean you don't have emotions. In fact, they've done a lot of studies on this, like, neural imaging. And, children who have avoidant attachment strategies are experiencing significant emotional distress. You just can't tell, you can't see it. And in adulthood, in dismissing attachment strategies, they tend to get their needs met transactionally. A lot of times, people who have dismissing attachment are highly accomplished because they don't know how to connect emotionally with other people. And so they transact relationships through social status, right? I am really good at my job. I have a lot of money. I, am considered, I have a PhD. And this is how they try to get recognition or appreciation. They tend to overly identify with their accomplishments, the things that they do, rather than developing a sense of self-esteem out of who they are. And as you can see in the image of the Ten of Wands, this singular, this is the other piece of dismissing attachment. They tend to feel dysregulated in relationships that are too intimate, too close. So they tend to feel more comfortable keeping people at a distance. So, if you are a person who has access easily to their emotions and express them easily, that could be distressing to a person who has dismissing attachment. And so you may find that that person takes actions to sort of keep you at arm's length. Or they are, the reason that it's called dismissing, they'll dismiss or diminish your own emotional states rather than connecting empathetically and offering comfort and soothing. That your expression of emotion sort of presses on this bruise of disowned emotions, and it is overwhelming, and they shut it down. So you can see easily this figure is carrying this tremendous weight of what it means to have to do in the world alone. This figure is not in collaboration with anyone else in regards to helping him carry that load. This guy is being crushed under the weight of this need to prove his worth to the world. And, usually when this card comes up in readings, I tell people, you got to put some of that weight down because this is not sustainable. This is how a person gets sick. When you are all go, 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 do, without any kind of ability to connect in with the body, with, your, anxiety levels, and you're just pushing through by sheer force, eventually, the body gives out. And again, what this card is representing is a lack of relational collaboration. He's doing it on his own. And this largely comes from this deep internal place of kind of not feeling confident about one's place in the world. That there's this sort of sense that the wounding that I've incurred is somehow, my fault, or I'm not good enough in order to get my needs met. The Nine of Wands is the self-confidence card. It is that feeling of, imposter syndrome, of not really knowing that you have what it takes to make your way in the world. And so you're kind of overcompensating by taking on more than your fair share. And again, what Spirit is saying here is that it is important for us to form a new way of being in the world, because this is really important as well. these archetypal energies are neither good nor bad. It depends on the lens through which we're seeing them, and also, you know, so the upside or the benefit of growing up with in a household where you learn early on no one's going to help you, so you better learn how to do it yourself, is that you are highly capable, right? A person who has dismissing attachment tends to know how to do a lot of things on their own. And there are real benefits to that, to being that capable. So it's not that it's an entirely bad thing, right? But when that's the only way that we have to express that archetypal energy, it can be damaging. The tarot is very much a map on how we can come into balance and how we can become more consciously aware of how these energies are being expressed through us. And so, what Spirit is suggesting is that it's time to express our passion, our creativity, our life force energy in a new way. And that's really being represented here by the Two of Wands. He is an explorer. He's exploring new territory. He is showing up in the world and saying to himself, I am going to approach things from this sort of present tense experience. Like, what do I feel? What am I taking in through my senses? And how do I wish to show up in the world based on what is motivating me to act? So the Two of Wands is saying we're at the beginning stages of a new journey. And the most important thing to remember when we're on the brink of a new experience is that it is essential that we throw out the old maps. We become willing to do things differently than we've done them in the past. We're willing to let go of our early childhood conditioning in order to have a new experience in the world, which first means that you need to see how you're being affected by that early childhood conditioning, right? You can't begin to move in a different direction until you can actually see how that those conditions have programmed you to function in the world. So we're being called to do something different. And the suggestion here is that we can utilize our passion and energy to greater success for ourselves and others when we're orienting ourselves in a different way in the world. And again, this means that we have to identify differently. We have to die to the old self. It's a kind of ego death, right? If I have thought of myself as, the lone wolf, what would things look like if I were more open to being a part of a community? Well, it might look a lot like engaging our emotions. In order for us, this is just a psychological truth, in order for us to be able to truly connect in a deep way to another person, it means that we have to do our own internal work. We have to be willing to be with these emotions that are largely living in our body. I mean, that's how you feel anything. It is actually a physical sensation that we carry in the body. And the reason this is so scary is that for many people who've experienced rejection, loss, neglect, abandonment, and obviously all this occurs on a spectrum. There are some people obviously who have experienced significant early childhood trauma, abuse, and then other people who simply weren't sort of attuned to or recognized for their emotions. I talk about this a lot with my clients, but because many people will come to me and they'll be struggling with certain things in their life that are kind of like indicators that there might be an attachment wound present. They have reoccurring issues within their primary relationships, or they have an impaired sense of self-esteem. And so I'm always kind of like, keeping my ears open for anything that might indicate an attachment wound when somebody's coming to therapy for, or even to tarot for those things. But a lot of times people will say, you know, I had a great childhood. You know, I was always clothed, I was always fed, I had plenty of toys. But they will often describe just a lack of emotional presence from their caregivers, or maybe even a lack of physical presence. This attunement piece is so vital to the mental and emotional health of a child as they're developing into adolescence and adulthood. And I think people underestimate how important it is. So I often cite the still face experiment, and you can go on YouTube and watch this. It's profound because in very little time, you can see how devastating it is for an infant to not have that kind of immediately responsive attunement from their mother. When it's there, everything is firing. Like, you know, when the infant is looking and smiling, and the mother is looking where the infant is pointing and smiling at the infant, what the infant experiences is like, I'm important. This is how I'm feeling, and this is what it looks like on my mother's face when I'm feeling this way. And we are together in this experience. And this creates this internal sense of safety within the infant. But what happens is the mother turns away and turns back with a still face. She's not angry. She's not frightening. She is just unresponsive. And what happens with the infant is astounding. It instantly recognizes that something is amiss, that it had her attention and now it's just gone. And it tries to get her back. We were just doing. No change in the mother. And the infant starts to get more and more agitated and sort of whimpers. No change until the infant disintegrates in, you know, tears. And of course, this is when the mother's like, oh, it's okay, I've got you, I've got you. This is to illustrate the importance of attunement. So what the Five of Cups is suggesting is that a lot of us refrain from actually connecting to these deep emotions, the emotions not only that we're having in the present tense, but that are tied to causes and conditions that came before. You know, in programs of recovery, we talk about if I'm hysterical, it's historical. If I'm having an emotional reaction to something that's happening in the present tense that is out of proportion to what's happening, chances are it's pointing to some unresolved wound from the past that I actually need to go and be with. When I am willing to be with those deep, painful emotions and stay present and stay compassionate, then they can start to process through. And what happens when I'm willing to do that work is that I'm able to stay present with other people who are having big emotional responses to things, and I don't have to push them away. It's not pressing on the bruise of my own unresolved trauma. I can tolerate it. I can be present with it. I can maintain that ability to connect empathetically. And so this is the thing. This is what the Five of Cups is saying, is that when we are unresolved about the loss of love in our own lives, the places where we've experienced rejection or, abandonment, then when we can't move beyond that, when we're not willing to acknowledge it and, offer it loving kindness, then we miss out on love. We cannot connect with other people so long as we're sort of stuck in this state of trying to transact our lives externally instead of really being with the difficult emotions in order to change, in order to grow, in order to transcend these old ways of being. Once we are able to turn towards the wound within ourselves, then we start to be able to turn towards the struggle of other people. Because let's face it, it's hard to be a human. And then we can start to take heartfelt action in all areas of life. Because remember, these are energetics, right? So if we are taking heartfelt action, then that not only looks like, you know, being more open to being in communities, or to, instead of like going to the cafe and just typing on my computer, to look people in the eye and smile and greet them and say hello. I mean, these don't have to be, big gestures. These are energetics. How can I be more open-hearted in all these different areas of life? How can I try new things that feel interesting or good? How can I, become more willing to express my authentic emotions instead of like hiding them and pretending that everything is okay when it's not? How can I learn to articulate my own inner states in a clear and concise way in order to elicit understanding with other people instead of using my emotions like a weapon? These are the kinds of things that is being represented. Knights are questers. They're seeking to fulfill a goal, and they will not stop until they've achieved that goal. They are action oriented, taking heartfelt action that is about empathy and that is oriented towards love. And then the Queen of Cups is one who feels her feelings deeply without being knocked off center by them. She now has access to the full spectrum of emotion. She can both feel the pain of, all the various things that she's gone through in life without having to shut down or distract herself. But she also has access to joy, to the sweetness of life, to, again, this full spectrum. Your heart is either open for all of it or it's closed down. And so we really are being called to investigate our internal landscape in a deeper way so that we can make different choices out in the world. So I don't know, it's a kind of an interesting message, and I can think of a lot of different ways that that might play out in regards to present day events. But I'd love to hear from all of you how this message lands and how you think it might be used skillfully in terms of what we're all going through right now collectively. So, as always, I wish you many blessings on this new moon, and I'm sending you much love as my neighbors, my fellow humans. Take care.